Hi, this is Melinda Hindenburger, the editor of Roll Call with Roll Call Roundtable. Today we're going to be talking to CQ's Todd Ruger, who has a new CQ Roll Call ebook out called Supreme Showdowns Inside the Senate Battles Over the High Court and What Awaits Obama's Nominee. First, Todd, what does await Obama's nominee? Everyone wants to know that.
Well, a lot of people think this might be a sacrificial lamb, is what people call Merrick Garland, who is the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit here in Washington. That's because the Republicans, the top Republicans, Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, as well as the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Charles Grassley of Iowa, have already said we're not holding hearings and we're not having a vote.
There seem to be a few cracks in the armor over that. Do you think that they are going to look at him at least during after Obama is a lame duck after the election in November?
Yeah, there's a lot of political calculus going on right now over on the Hill. What you had when Obama announced Merrick Garland as the nominee last week, he said, just be fair, just be fair. And it was a beautiful day, spring day, flowering trees, and everything went really well for the Obama administration because immediately there were Republican senators on the Hill who said, I'd be open to meeting Garland because he's very well respected on both sides. And then you have Senator Orrin Hatch, who in 2010 was advocating for Garland to be nominated to an opening back at that time. And so when we asked him about that, he said about Garland, he said, well, I would be open to maybe after the elections having a confirmation hearing and vote for Merrick Garland. So you have this sort of strategy, and it kind of depends on who's in the White House, whether the Republicans can retain control of the Senate.
You really have to wonder if President Obama outfoxed the Senate Republicans politically when you see the choice. I mean, he seemed like something straight out of Frank Capra. George Bailey comes to life. This capable, decent person whose voice is cracking because he has so much feeling in the moment when he was first presented to the public.
Correct. I mean, he is. That was Obama's strategy, as he calls it, to play it straight. Which is, when you look at the finalists that Obama was looking at, there was a judge on the D.C. Circuit named Sri Srinivasan, who would have been the first Asian American on the court. There was a black female judge in Washington's district court that would have been the first black female on the court. And so there was a lot of pressure from liberal groups to maybe name one of those people who would be younger, first of all, add diversity to the court, really rally politically in both the presidential campaign and the Senate contested re-election campaigns, really rally people around this nominee. And instead, he basically chose the judge that could have been the Republicans' the best thing that Republicans could have expected out of an Obama White House. I mean, they weren't going to get another Scalia. So this is about as good as they could. And so by playing it straight, he's basically saying this is the best you're going to get, and you're still going to block this nominee.
What do you make of that politically? I mean, do you think that the Republicans look worse if they're kind of hiding under their desks when Merrick Garland comes to call? Or is it a situation where the Democrats can't keep up that pressure on the Republicans for the next 7.5 months?
Well, I think they're going to try to keep up that pressure, but how much the public is paying attention, that's up in the air. I think the Republicans are kind of hoping that it's not going to rank up there when people are going out there to vote for president or vote for Senate. They're thinking about jobs or the economy or something like that. So how much that political pressure stays, I'm not sure. But one of the critiques of this from some of the liberal groups was that this pick, while they would maybe confirm him if it wasn't this crazy fight right now in a political year, he's still not the kind of pick that's going to bring any Republican over to cross the line. He's acceptable, but he's not going to inspire Republicans to change their mind. So it's really not going to do enough to move the Senate one way or the other. The strategy really is after this November election, if let's say Hillary Clinton takes the White House, you're going to be looking at even more liberal or even younger pick who could stay on the court for a lot longer. They might take the Merrick Garland they have rather than the liberal activist judge that they would see coming down the pike.
And meanwhile, this gives the Democrats, I would say, a potent talking point during the rest of this election cycle, that even this decent man is not getting a hearing.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I think a couple of these progressive groups would have rather seen a woman nominee, because then you have paired up with Hillary Clinton perhaps being the first female president. You could rally female voters, or maybe a Hispanic judge who would have gotten the Hispanic vote. But maybe the calculus there was we don't need either of those groups. They're already on our side.
I was listening to C-SPAN on my way into work last week, and there was a caller on the Republican line who said he was very upset that as a white Protestant Southerner, he saw no one like himself on the court.
That's true. Merrick Garland is Jewish, and everybody on the court is either Jewish or Catholic at the moment.
So tell us a little bit about this ebook. What is the gist of the book?
Well, the gist of the book is about how the White House handles the Senate confirmation battles for Supreme Court justices. And I went back to Ronald Reagan and forward through Bill Clinton. And the reason I picked those are because there are these documents that the White House can keep secret for more than a dozen years after the administration's ended. And those are the presidential papers that advisors give to the president and send back and forth about some things like the Supreme Court nominee, where they can speak freely about these assessments of these potential nominees without worrying about being public in the next year or two or something like that through the Freedom of Information Act. So these are held secret for years, and those are the documents that I focused on for this book.
What are a few of the things that came as the biggest surprises from these secret documents, or documents that had previously not been released?
Well, the surprises, like, for instance, one of them in Justice Breyer, Clinton appointed Justice Breyer to the court, and there's this assessment in there that calls him a cold fish, that he's got bloodlessness.
And was that a positive?
That was not a positive. But that's the kind of level of detail that they think through when they're deciding who to pick. Is like, what is their emotional appeal to people, or how do they emotionally handle the cases before them? How will they interact with other justices? Will they be a consensus builder or not? So one of the interesting things about Justice Scalia was that they said their assessment was he's going to be a consensus builder on the Supreme Court. Once he got there, even he himself was like, I'm not going to be a consensus builder. The reason is because he strictly interprets the text, and he basically says, if you're just saying what the text is, you can't compromise. The text is what it is. So
that was so interesting.
Yeah.
He's saying, I'm going to the opera with Ruth, but that's it.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I thought it was interesting, too, what you wrote about how they were assessing Scalia as someone who drank, smoked, and never exercised, but they hoped it would still be okay.
Right, yeah. And what they're doing is they're looking at the length of time that they could have an influence on the court. If for instance, that's one of the criticisms here, that Judge Garland is 63. If he had picked a younger nominee, like 49 was one of the other ones, 48, then you've got an extra 14 years perhaps that person might be alive and working on the court. And that's your influence as a president, staying on that court for longer. And the Reagan administration paid great attention to that. And Justice Scalia, although he did drink and smoke, and then he was a hunter, so you imagine he ate a lot of red meat and stuff as well. But he had nearly 30 years on the court.
Right. And what was the biggest of these big fights over these nominations? I think we always think of the Clarence Thomas fight, or at least I do, as one of the biggest explosions in my adult lifetime. But as you look back through these cases, which one was the biggest battle royale?
Well, I mean, Clarence Thomas was so dramatic, and had the nation gripped. It was televised. It was really something. And then you had these. In the book, I go through these documents where the Republicans are pushing for a vote before this little recess. They're saying, we got to have a vote Wednesday, we got to have a vote Thursday. And they were even, the Bush administration was even saying, hey, senators, maybe we don't like your civil rights bill quite as much if we don't get a vote now, this week. And then, of course, the weekend, the vote didn't happen. The weekend following that, there was a big leak about Anita Hill, and all of that came out over the weekend. The Senate came back, and Bob Dole at the time, a senator, said, it's not surprising that there was a big leak over the weekend. We kind of felt like something like this would happen. And so, that was really a dramatic moment in these. But I think the nomination of Robert Bork, that was torpedoed almost immediately by Senator Ted Kennedy at the time, was considered the turning point in making these really political fights.
And how were they able to do that? What made that turning point possible?
Well, if you look back through the documents, the Reagan administration wasn't expecting a huge fight over Robert Bork. They thought that it would be somewhat in the traditional style of Supreme Court fights. But then within minutes or hours after announcing him as the nominee, Senator Kennedy got on the floor and made a really impassioned speech about this is what Robert Bork's America would look like, abortions and stuff like that. And that immediately brought the level of intensity of the political campaign up. It caught the Reagan administration by surprise. They did a reply to all this, but it took them a month or more to even come up with this plan and this book and this research to counteract what the Democrats were doing. And so there you had national ads by Gregory Peck, narrated by Gregory Peck, and you just got to this level that had not been seen before in terms of politicizing the fight.
Can you imagine a month to respond in today's environment? No.
In fact, even before they announced Merrick Garland as the nominee, they had a Twitter handle, at SCOTUS nom, on Twitter, so that they could push out all the information.
The pre-battle.
Right. They're ready to fire away when there's any critiques about Judge Garland.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me here.
So next we're going to hear from Simone Pathé on her story that's in today's roll call, really interesting, on the woman who is the Democrats' hope for unseating Richard Burr, senator from North Carolina. The headline is, "Can this North Carolina Democrat be the next Kay Hagan?" Can she, Simone?
That's the question that is riding on the presidential race, really. It's one of these states where if Donald Trump or even Ted Cruz is the Republican nominee for president, it could become a lot more competitive. North Carolina traditionally has been a state that tends to blow with the national winds, the national trends. So Deborah Ross is not the Senate candidate that Democrats wanted originally, but she is an impressive candidate, and whether she can be the next Kay Hagan or not has a lot to do with the presidential race at this point.
Tell a little bit about her background and what is so impressive about her.
Sure. So she was the state director of the state ACLU in North Carolina. That's probably going to end up being more of a liability for her in a general election as compared to a primary, of course. She just won her primary last Tuesday. She garnered 62% of the vote in a four-way contest, which was actually slightly more than Richard Burr won in the Republican primary. He came in at around 61%. She served 10 years in the state house. She fought the Republican General Assembly on a lot of these onerous voting restrictions that are now really shaping the election in North Carolina this year. She has good fundraising connections. Only time will tell whether she's able to raise the $10 million that she says she wants to raise this campaign. But she's a well-spoken, very articulate, very aggressive, and very driven candidate.
When she said, you say in the story that she repeatedly describes herself as a both and kind of person, you don't often hear that from someone in politics. What exactly does she mean in a political context?
Sure. So when she said that, this was days before the primary, and it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that she was going to win this primary. But the day before, she had been on the road until 11 o'clock at night. She said she didn't have time for dinner. She had to stop at a gas station to grab a sandwich or something to keep her going. So the point was that she was aggressively campaigning for the primary, but also looking forward to the general election. Her first television ad was on the air before the primary, and that, again, is just a sign of her trying to have a foot really in both races. And I think that's going to shape how she tries to campaign for the rest of the cycle.
I thought it was funny when you said that she says her greatest liability is she always likes to be perfect.
Yes, you can definitely tell that talking to her.
A very job interview kind
yes,
of
she's a very
response. I care too much.
She's a very type A person, and that comes through for sure.
And the idea that she might be too liberal for a general election, even from some of her fellow Democrats. What were you hearing about that?
Yes. So it was funny. Within minutes of her winning her primary on Tuesday night, the National Republican Senate Committee blasted out an email about some of her time and some of the measures she fought for at the ACLU and even the state legislature. That's definitely something they're going to try to tar her with. The argument now is that she fought against, for civil liberties reasons, a sex offender registry. Obviously, some of that is taken out of context. Whether she did or not doesn't really matter. It's the fact that they can put that in an ad, and it probably will resonate with voters, maybe not, but it's certainly a strong attack. There's also, of course, a lot of parts of rural North Carolina. She's from the urban area. She's from Raleigh. She's not from the state originally. She's been there for about 30 years, but she has her work.
So a newcomer.
A newcomer. She has her work cut out for her to connect with some of these towns that are really struggling right now.
And then the answer to that I saw in your piece is that she's another Elizabeth Warren, that she's in the Elizabeth Warren mold, which, again, may or may not endear her to her fellow North Carolinians.
That's true, yes. And I think that's part of that is substance. I'm not sure if she would brand herself as quite that progressive or liberal. I think a lot of it is style and the fact that she is very driven, very dedicated, and very passionate about the way she speaks about issues she cares about.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Alex Ganchitano, who writes our Heard on the Hill column. And Alex, this is Women's History Month, and you've been doing a series of pieces in keeping with that. Last week you had a piece. Tell us a little bit about World War II women pilots who, at one point, these women were being interred at Arlington National Cemetery, and now they're no longer allowed.
Right, so these female pilots in World War II, they're referred to as WASPs, actually, were revoked the rights last year to be buried at Arlington.
Why did that happen, Alex?
It was really a bizarre thing for the Army to pull. I mean, in 2002, they were given the rights to, and now suddenly the former secretary took it away from them. So now we have, really, it's a bipartisan effort in the House, but it's led by a former fighter pilot, Martha McSally, whose bill is going to be considered on the floor next week to get these rights back for these women.
Do we know what the argument was against allowing that?
The Army's argument was that these women should have never received these rights in the first place, which makes a lot of critics question if the Army thinks these pilots don't deserve to be honored, which is, of course, upsetting to a lot of these women. And then there are several that have passed away this year, and their families now are fighting with these congresswomen to get their grandparents or grandmothers in the cemetery. And a lot of these women spoke at a press conference, just said, this seems like a no-brainer. Who wouldn't vote for this bill in the House?
Right. If they can agree on anything, this would seem to be one. So this week you're going to be meeting with some women who are Rosie the Riveters, right? So I'm sure they're outraged about this. Tell a little bit about this group.
We all know the Rosie the Riveter image from Norman Rockwell's iconic depiction. These women supported the war efforts in factories while men were in the trenches. And this image is all about women's strength, which of course is what Women's History Month is all about. It's interesting that this visit aligns with the vote in the House that came up because the Army decided that these WASPs should have never been able to be buried at Arlington, and military women like McSally and her partner in the Senate, Joni Ernst, are outraged. Yes, so the Rosie the Riveter group is coming to town. Ford Motors actually flying them over here from Detroit, a group of 30, 80 to 90-year-old women. And it's a classic Women's History Month, and it's a bipartisan effort between Debbie Dingell and Candace Miller to get these women here. They're all having a luncheon together, the Library of Congress, and then they're actually going to the World War II Memorial to see what D.C. has to offer and see how they're being honored there.
Oh, that's so great. That's so moving. I always love to go there with my dad, who's a World War II vet. He loves hanging out there to meet his fellow vets.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing about why this is happening this year is because in October of 2015, a bunch of Rosie the Riveters got together and broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest group that were in one place since World War II. So this is really honoring their efforts and how there's so many still here.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for joining us for Roll Call Roundtable. See you next week.